Today I'm going to do a slightly new format for the channel. I'm going to sort of term it On the Table, where we're going to take a look at a collection of associated items. I've been meaning to get around to making this video, unlike it, for a few weeks, as 2020 was not only a terrible year in which a lot of families have lost their loved ones to the terrible COVID, but also through that other terrible disease, cancer. One that will be greatly missed is a contributor to the Vintage Radio Forum, Karen Orton. She's probably best known amongst the retro computing community for her 2007 microchip PIC 14 recreation of this device. This is a modern clone, obviously, but built with authentic parts, some of which can be expensive and difficult to get, and it's the Science of Cambridge MK14, which was Clive Sinclair and Chris Curry's first outing into the computer world in the late 70s. The first version from Karen, the PIC 14, which is publicly available as a design, allows much easier devices to use, to build, and gives people an experience that firsthand, a lot of which is the assembly of the parts and the building of the device. She was kind enough to let some of us on the Vintage Radio Forum take custody of many of her computer creations, and I was on to help her and her family secure the collection of homebrew computers, some of which you see here. Her home had an impressive collection of 1970s cassette players, 1950s radios and TVs, and she was also interested in narrow bandwidth television. But this video will concentrate on the homebrew devices she created around the SCMP chip used in the original MK14, often emulated with a PIC based on the work she did for the PIC 14, but also including authentic period chips as well in some of the designs. There are a lot of them. So for a short time, while they're almost all still together, a family photograph seemed appropriate. They're also exquisitely built working machines, so deserve to be seen operating, which you'll hopefully be able to do, taking them to the lab one at a time. There's a link in the video details to a webpage on techlib.com, which along with the PIC 14 itself, you will find a range of nice projects to build to learn about using the PIC microcontrollers. The message wand, the orrery and the talking voltmeter all look like fun projects for a beginner. She was based in Bridgnorth, Shropshire, and graduated in electronics in 1981, where after a brief period in telecoms for a few years, she spent most of her working life in control systems as an embedded developer, mostly on digital signal processing, probably why she likes the PIC chip so much. So also on that site is the designs for her next computer from back then, which was a tiny little single board computer with what would have been the ultimate goal for any SCMP or SCAMP based computer owner, and that was the NIBL, the National Semiconductor Industrial Basic Language, which was a tiny basic. So that little board there is just a standard 1200 board serial connected machine running the emulator and a copy of the NIBL industrial language. She briefly moonlighted on the Retro Computers Org forum in 2018, and she put up the designs for some of her later NIBL based computers, which we'll go through. And she was just out there asking for if there are any SCMP enthusiasts out there, because she said, this underpowered microprocessor has a special place in my heart. It was the first micro I learned to code for, and I spent many an hour at uni finding the Dr. Dobbs article on National Industrial Basic Language NIBL, and then entering the hex into an ancient Burroughs computer to blow 42708s. I'm still living in the 1979, and Martha and the Muffins are on the radio. Smile. In 2010, she also built the mini scamps, these tiny little machines which are basically an SCMP emulator with tiny little switches and lamps to indicate the outputs of the address and data lines. Very reminiscent of another project you will have seen on my channel, which is the Scrumpy computer. This was the version 1, which is quite big and chunky, and then a really tiny, as she called it, executive toy. She joined the Vintage Radio Forum in 2011 with a post asking about TV conversion from 625 to 405 line, long before I joined. And one project worth looking up on there is the PIC clock. That's quite clever use of the technique which is used in a lot of the video-able ones of these machines, which uses the serial port as the dot clock to create the video. One machine I don't have that's mentioned on the forum is one from about 2016, which is a version of the PIC-14 she built that looks very much like the DSKY used on the Apollo mission. So many people have built a PIC-14. One forum member, Phil, even produced a PCB recently to make the task easier, although it does use the original transistor display drivers from the earlier model. So, as she said when she emailed me with the list, there's a real range of machines. Some have an internal regulator, others requires an externally regulated 5-volt supply. Some have proper RS-232 serial ports, and others use 5-volt serial. They're all quite clearly marked, and we're going to go over them one at a time now and have a look at how they function. So one of the first machines we're going to take into the lab is this recreation of the MK14 in a beautiful case, which also comes with a cassette recorder that contains a built-in tape interface for the MK14 and a really interesting oscilloscope display adapter, which is a modern creation from Karen. So here's the first one, the Orton MK14 with its useful manual. We won't be able to try out the oscilloscope immediately this session. I'll have another go another time for the display. We might even try it on a clone modern MK14, see if it works, but it's definitely designed to work with this one. We'll need to dig out a scope that has X and Y inputs from our electronics room and set that up later. But initially then, it's powered from a 9-volt centre positive supply. The cassette needs a 12-volt centre positive. I've just powered that from the bench power supply at the moment. And we turn it on, and we get the standard MK14 monitor version 2 display of 4 zeros and the contents of first address in memory. We can press mem to go to the first address 1, which contains CF hex, and this is stepping through one memory location at a time, looking at the contents of the Science of Cambridge operating system, SIOS. As I said, version 2, the version 1 comes up with a bunch of dashes. So, we can press the reset button and go back. So, one of the things we can do is enter addresses in memory, of course, as you can on a standard MK14. So if we put in an area of memory that we know is available to us, for example 0F12, then we are able to put something into that address if we want to. So if we abort the address entry or terminate the address entry, we can change that, say, to 00, step to the next address, 01, step to the next address by pressing the mem key, 02, step to the next address, 03. Now if we abort and go back to 0F12, we will find our 0, then our 1, then our 2, and then our 3. And then we're back to where we were, and at that point we could put something in, for example FF if we want to. So that's how you basically enter a program. Doesn't take too long before you find that is quite laborious, and something like this comes into its own, which is a cassette interface. In fact, it's so laborious, I've this entry of the program from the manual, the scrolling message, I speeded up the typing in, and I also stepped through every single location, checking it against the hex listing I have to make sure it's all correct. This at least then allows us to hopefully see the program running, and then we'll switch to using the cassette deck to show it operates correctly. I think you'll agree it is quite laborious typing in a program on an MK14. So the actual cassette deck and the Science of Cambridge cassette interface are built into the deck. It just uses some of the flags and connections on a 9-pin serial cable at the back, which carries the connections through to the cassette deck, which actually contains the interface card or modern recreation of it and a cassette mechanism. As you can see, they are beautifully made with a bit of bent brushed aluminium board, lovely sticker. They just look the part, they really do. They're a beautiful bit of engineering. So we type that program in from the manual, and hopefully, so we do a abort now, and we go to the start address of the message, and we press go. There we go, and that is the standard message from the Science of Cambridge MK14 manual. Scrolling around on the Karen Orton MK14 computer. Now, if we don't want to re-enter that, what we're going to do is we're going to have to save it to tape. So we're going to get out of that program, which is in a continuous loop, by pressing reset. Luckily, that doesn't damage memory. So if we go to 0F20, we can see that our data is still in there. So what we're going to do is we're going to put the length of that program F8, and we'll call it 7F characters long. And then in F9, which is the address to load or save from, we're going to put the 0F as the top byte. And at FA, we're going to put 20 as the bottom byte. Select the address for the tape out to tape 0052, hopefully put onto a address here from Karen, hopefully. And we should be ready to press go. But in order to do that, now we've got to press play and record on the tape deck. Oops, that's that one and that one together. And that we'll let it clear the header before we press go. There aren't a lot of indications on here of how this is working. On the original tape interface you had a couple of LEDs. Karen's got a similar one here. So basically, because you can see all the flags as LEDs, we're going to press go now. And there we are, we should see flag 0 flicking away, and we can hear it on the audio monitor as well. Because flag 0 is shared by the audio monitor and audio out service on the, which is an add-on you could make to the MK14. So it's saving out the data to tape at approximately, I think it's about 30 baud, so it's pretty slow. There we are, that's finished. So we can press stop now. And we can rewind the cassette. And hopefully if we turn off the MK14 and turn it back on again, we should find if we go to 0F20, nothing in there. So we'll now go to 0FF8, no, FF9, and we'll put in 0F and 20 in FFA. That's the place where we want to load the data into. So we're going to abort that address, and we're going to use the from tape 7C. And we're not going to press go yet. We're going to press play, and we see the little flicker of noise, which was at the we press play, but now we can press go, and we should see the SN and SB lights start to flicker as the data is loaded into memory. Once it gets there, we had quite a long leader, didn't we? So hopefully it won't be long. There we go. It's the data streaming in through the serial in port. Shouldn't be too long. As soon as it's finished loading, the only way you know it's finished, it's the lights stop flickering. And of course you can hit reset, which doesn't damage memory. And then you can stop the tape. You shouldn't do it the other way around, because of course you get more corruption on the end of the file. There you go, we rewind the tape straight away. So now if I go to 0F20, we should have C4, yep. C0D, that's looking promising. That's actually the program. So we abort and go to 0F20 and we press go. Yay, we've reloaded the program from the MK14 cassette. Okay. So here we have the Orton SCMP computer set up on the bench. We'll have a little look at it in a minute in more detail. You can see the RS-232 breakout box on the left, because I've got it hooked up to the PC output. So there's a terminal that's seeing the print output of the Orton terminal. It's got a composite connection onto the CRT TV over in the corner, as you can see. So we've got NIBL started up, just pressed return a few times. And then here we have the Orton Peripheral System, which we'll go into in a little bit of detail probably in a later video, but it's essentially a serial communication with a number of like input-output devices, a radio receiver which can also receive input from a remote control, and also it's got a speech synthesizer in it, which hopefully we can hear in a minute. So we hooked up a speaker to it so we can hear its sounds. The machine itself is basics consists of two different machines in real terms. So let's take a little bit of a closer look at it. If we can put the speaker down a minute, we should be able to just lift the lid a little bit and see inside it. Okay, and as you can see, we've got a pair of PIC chips, one of which is a basic screen terminal and does the video display, and the other one is a NIBL computer with suitable ROM and memory hooked up to a keyboard matrix, the details of which are quite worth reading because it's based on an old keyboard but with micro switches underneath and all hand wired. So I've removed the screw so we can have a quick look inside it. Okay, so now we go back to taking a look at the machine itself. Hopefully you can see the design and the screen. We've now got, if we run the program we've got, there we go, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Obviously this computer keyboard doesn't do anything from the terminal because there's no data in. But this implements a way of being able to get data loaded as well, so we could store a program on the PC. It's now running on the machine, so nothing's coming out on the terminal, but if I do Control P, which starts echoing 1200 baud out to the terminal, then everything we see in here is echoed onto the terminal. So need a space there. You've got to press these keys fairly firmly. A nice clicky sound though. Feels very retro. Okay, so now we can do that, but obviously the terminal keyboard doesn't actually do anything. The PC keyboard doesn't do anything, which I'm just got slightly out of camera. So we can enable that by setting some of the status flags. So if I set stat, which is some of the status flags, equal to 23, which enables the RS232 functionality through the flags on the SCMP, because in NIBL the stat is a pseudo variable that allows to show the status of the status flags and set them. So we're setting, obviously with 23, we're setting bit 4, bit 2, bit 1 and bit 0, which means the flags are set, plus the unused IRQ, which is reused on this for indicating echoing of the data, which should allow us to see what we type here. So if I type list on this keyboard now, it starts to appear on the screen, and so we get a type out of what is actually there, and we see the data as well. So you could now use that to be able to load in some data from the local PC if we had a large program. So there we go. That's the machine, which is actually two machines in one. It's both the parallel dumb terminal, effectively, which has a screen display and a keyboard, passes over using a parallel connection to the SCMP NIBL computer, which is also built on the same board. So the matching peripheral system is the next one. We can control that directly from our terminal here. So if I just unplug the PC and plug it into the peripheral system, and we turn on the amplifier. Okay, we now should have the peripheral system responding to what we do in this terminal. So if I press return, it does nothing. But if I press A, We are sending data to the allophone speech synthesizer on the first board here. And you can see the little LED flashing hopefully on camera. There we go. So let's move the camera in a little bit closer for you so you get a good view of the peripheral system as it's running. So basically, when I do an allophone type, it does that. We can also on the screen get some responses back. The cards are, there's a radio receiver for the remote, and we've got inputs and outputs that can be set under control, and on there in one of the cards contains a real-time clock and also a limited amount of space to permanently store some config data or information as well. So if we take a look at the screen again, we should be able to see, well, we should be able to control that from the NIBL computer as well in a minute, which will be more interesting because that's what it's designed to be controlled from. But I can also do on the screen, if I scale the screen up a little bit, so we've got some bigger characters, then basically if I also do an F, there we are, we get this is the Canon Orton peripheral system, which is what I've got stored permanently in the memory. We can store anything we like in there, so if I do E, well, this is a cool retro SC/MP system, and we clear the screen. Then if I do an F now, there we are. Oh, I've spelled it wrong, but this is a cool retro SCMP system. So you can basically permanently store some data in there, which will survive power off and power on. We'll go over the peripheral system a little bit more in future videos, because there's quite a lot to explore. But as you can see, it's quite a clever system. It basically uses the serial port and provides it along on a bus, so each card then can control it. It's worth a video of its own, I think, to explore all its possibilities. But it does work from the NIBL computer as well. So if we unplug the PC and we disconnect that one, we will just use a standard serial cable to connect up to the serial port on the back of the NIBL computer and terminal, and plug that into the there, and we should be able to do the same from here. We should be able to do an A. If I do Control P to enable output to the serial port, and I do an A, exactly the same. Okay, so here we are with what I think is probably the cutest machine, the Orton ASR33 terminal, which has its own built-in CRT monitor, cassette deck, and a rebuilt keyboard with the micro switches underneath, similar to the previous machine we looked at. And it's currently hooked up with a 9-pin serial to the SCMP real-time emulator with the NIBL Basic on it. So this machine goes some way towards addressing the issues around saving to and from tape that are evident with NIBL, that probably would have worked with a paper tape because of the speed at which it was coming back off the tape. But obviously with cassette it can provide data back faster than NIBL can absorb it. So this has a method of at least providing some pauses in it. So it's mains powered. It's one of the few that is actually fully powered from the mains. Although the SCMP emulator is done from a 9-volt wall wart. So if I power it on, obviously it's with a CRT, it takes a little while to come up. And there we have our, let's put the lighting down a little bit. Okay, here we go. So maybe we'll stick it on a slightly dimmer light. There we go. So if we press return, we should see the little prompt for NIBL, which we do indeed. And just like the other NIBLs, you can do one. There we go. Okay. So what else can we do with it that is possible? So the tape deck simulates a paper tape reader. So you can basically do the same sort of thing. So if I press play on the tape, or rewind it actually fully because there's some... It's already been used to load and save a program. Of course, there's no load and save commands as such. It's just anything that comes off of the tape is loaded into the machine. So hopefully now, just like starting the paper tape reader, basically the ASR gets the data off the tape and echoes it out to the serial port, which will then enter it into the SCMP. There we go. So that's a giant long program that basically just tests the system. So that can go on for quite some time because it's quite a few hundred lines long. There we go. So that's the tape deck. You can similarly, obviously, if you press record, then it records anything that's being listed out on the terminal. So the save to tape is basically just a matter of doing the same thing. You put it into the point where you've got the list command up, like that. Sorry, correct keyboard. So if I do that and then you press record on tape and press list, and as it's typed out by the terminal, it'll be saved on the cassette, which is all we did to save and load that program. We won't go over that because we've seen tape save and load before. But we've got a couple of photographs of the machine with its back off that Karen took when it was built, and a little bit of detail on the inside of the SCMP, which we'll explore as well. Of course, both machines come with the extensive typed documentation that provides a little bit of detail about how the machine works and what we do about saving and loading. So the actual SCMP emulator also has one. It's basically the same as the others. It's one of the PICs, but with a proper RS-232 connection running at, I think it's 310 baud only. So that's the interesting point. The speed you're seeing is 110 baud, which was the common one for a TTY back in the day, rather than the more common 300 baud you saw with modems. Now that is quite a slow type. It's about 10 characters a second. So this one is one from 2020 that Karen did. As usual, it's got its booklet. This is the probably the cleverest one, the Orton View computer with page 2 support. Now, page 2 is a very clever extension to the NIBL system that provides built-in assembler and monitor functions, which obviously aren't present on typical SCMP computers. And this device is the actual computer. It is an SCMP one with Karen's sticker. It's got the tape deck built in, and it's ready to go. It's got an additional serial port on the outside, and this is a standard terminal similar to the one she's built previously. So it's a PIC chip based one, but it runs at 1200 baud, not the parallel port one as in the earlier machine, or the serial 110 baud as in the ASR. But it's basically got a competent video out onto the TV. You can just hook it up with a standard serial connector to a PC if you want as well. And the auxiliary port can use either the printer or the speech synthesizer. So let's turn it on and give it a go. It's a mains powered one using a twin connector. Oh, there we go, it's on the front. There we go. And now that's Eddie, and therein lies the tail. On the original peripheral system that had the speech synthesizer, but I didn't cover this. Karen told me that the I/O system was very poignant with respect for her and the SCMP, because she automated a house using a nibble machine. It would turn the lights on at pre-programmed times. She thinks there's probably still relay boxes under the floor of her first house, and it had this SPO256 speech synthesizer and the radio remote we saw. So when she pressed the attention button, it would say "Greetings, mistress," but seemed to put too much emphasis on the M and sounded like it was peeved about something. She said she named it Eddie because of the reference to the Hitchhiker's Guide, obviously. So she also recounts that Eddie was hallucinating people at the door, but only on very wet days. So lowering a pull-up resistor cured Eddie without resort to antipsychotics. So I've got the speech synthesizer hooked up as the peripheral. We'll try the printer afterwards. But let's have a quick look at page 2 and how it works. We can do nib to go back to nibble itself, which allows us to do the same controls as we would do in normal nibble. So we are probably on page 2. So if I do print space page, which is the variable. Whoops, I missed the space, because the space is it's not a bar, it's just a single key. So okay, so we're definitely on page 2, which contains the actual page 2 assembler, which is a bit of code with a little bit of basic, and the link command will execute the machine code at the address given, and in this case top, it's the pseudo variable top, which is the first 3 byte after the basic. So this page contains the assembly language already in for the page 2 commands. So when I hit run on this page, I will end up going back into the page 2 command system. And we can do a dir, which will show us all the different pages that are on there. So there's a number of free pages. From here we can do DMP to dump memory. So if we do a DMP, oops, that's a syntax error. I've got a DMP the address. So if I DMP, I can't use the variable top here, but we could say so if I DM just from the actual start of memory, there we go. So we can dump data on it, and from this position we can do what we want to do, go back to a previous position, so you can carry on dumping more memory. So it's quite a useful little monitor. We can also, I think, is do dot to get out of it, which is Shift and C, I think. There we go, to go back to the nibble commands. We can also got a CHM change memory command there, and we've got a save page to cassette and a load page from cassette. And then we got a PRN, which is the print the page to the auxiliary port, which would allow, obviously, for the printer. And we've also got the ASM command, which allows us to assemble whatever's in memory. Well, I was going to show you the little thermal printer, but unfortunately, when powered up, there's a distinct whiff of burning electronic components. So there's obviously a fault on the little mini printer that's part of it. So I'll have to have I took it apart quickly, but it's obviously nothing burnt out that I can see. So it needs a bit of serious testing. So we'll probably take a look at that as a complete episode by itself to try and get it repaired and running. It's pretty unfortunate. Here we go. So we plugged Eddie's voice back in, and we'll take a little look at the assembler functions and the cassette. Okay, so we're going to load the program from cassette. So we have to turn it over because once it's playing, you're halfway in, and we'll do a fast forward so we can rewind the cassette and eject it. And now we can stick it in. ready to go. It starts playing as soon as you put it in. So if I load, oops, wrong keyboard, load to page 1. So we'll load whatever's on the cassette into page 1. Okay, let's go off camera a minute and have a play, shall we? Okay, well, RTFM is quite good. You actually need to load it into page 3 because reading on a little bit in the manual, the assembler uses page 1 to create the symbol table. So hopefully this will now work. I've reloaded it into page 3. Yay, pass 1 and pass 2. So we've now got the actual program assembled on this page. So if we go into nibble and let page equal 3, which is where our program is, and we list it. Obviously we've got the print string program, and we should be able to do a run, question mark, hello space world, hello world, breaker 40. And we can see the effect of that symbol table that I've set page to 1, and we just get the rem sim tab because the symbol table is stored in the rest of the page. So there we go, that's the page 2 services explained as best I can. I think we'll get out something to label these, just so that we remember that this is the reset and this is the record lock. It's on a relay, so once you press it, it locks in the record head, and as the tape's going, it starts to record from that point onwards, and when you eject the tape, it de-energizes the relay. So it's quite a simple number of limited controls, and I also want to label the back, so when I've got a proper labeler, so that we can remember what they are next time. So here is the probably the final machine we're going to look at in detail today, based on the SCMP machines. And I think I mentioned it earlier, one of the things that always bugged Karen was how back in the day you could load and save nibble programs to and from cassette reliably. The ASR one allowed it by adding delays. This one is basically got a standard Kansas City cassette interface. Here over to a cassette deck. This is actually a real SCMP computer, built and ready to go. There's a power on the back, so turn it on. And this is another one of the terminals built ready to go. So if I power that on, we should get a prompt on the screen. I'll turn the menu off so we get that. And basically now when I do a new line, we have got the standard nibble which we would expect. You can see the data light flashing on a Kansas City cassette interface because it basically puts the data out constantly onto the interface. I actually change it over. These are all mains powered, so each one of them's got its own mains lead, all this wires snaking in all directions. So if we basically put this into read mode, so we'll be able to load from cassette, the actual summary of the problem, I suppose worth looking at it, is the fact that you've basically got nibble takes time to process its data coming back in as it inserts the lines, and as the program gets bigger that takes longer. Nibble did have some built-in flow control on flag F1, which was supposed to be connected to the reader relay on an ASR33 teletype, so that as the paper punch was running, Nibble could basically freeze the paper punch at the position it was in, and that would come in. But obviously the paper punch was quite slow in real terms, so it would only have, you probably wouldn't have get too many more characters once you asked the relay to shut down. But with a cassette, that doesn't happen. So it's worth having a little look at the manual and the documentation because it's quite a detailed solution about it. So basically this one runs at 300 baud, which is the Kansas City tape standard. So it's a little bit faster than the ASR33 simulator, which is 110, and obviously a bit slower than the previous one we looked at, 1200 baud. So this is a 300 baud terminal basically. So the RS232 connector sits between them. So the the system is designed to allow you to save data, and it's very clever. What it does is there's quite a bit of gap, a silence between each of the lines. So that is about a 27 millisecond processing time. So you was thinking you could detect that period and then allow it to suspend the SCMP while that was happening. And there's but the actual technique that she uses, which is simpler, is during the NADS period of the SCM processor cycle, some status bits appear on the data bus, and D indicates that the SCMP is about to execute a delay instruction. And since NIBL uses delays for serial timing generation, the flag's a reliable indication of the serial activity. So she turns that into a NADS time status, so a continuous indication of serial data transfer, so they're monostable. So the interline silence periods show up on the output of that monostable, and that triggers a second monostable which just suspends the SCMP for 0.5 seconds through its NEN input, which basically suspends the processor. So basically, if you turn on the throttling service, basically the SCMP will do it. So it's quite a simple little circuit with a 74LS132, 2 halves used to be able to do it, and then you've got the button to turn the throttle on and off. So I think this is the throttle on off button. I'm not sure which way's on and off, because again we need to do some labels I think for this, so we might have a bit of experiment going. So she tested it by putting a program into RAM, which is a giant one, generates an enormous size program, 400 line program, using NIBL's very clever ability to write data. It doesn't have a peek and a poke, but you can write data directly into using the @ operator. So it's quite a powerful little language if you haven't played with it. So there we should be able to see something happening and loading and reading. So let's see what we can do, shall we? I believe that obviously all it does, don't forget, is this is the same situation where the keyboard and because the terminal is part of the Kansas City cassette interface, basically everything you play from the tape just gets played out the serial port as if you were typing it on the terminal. So we should see it on the screen, and it'll be sent on to the actual SCMP computer. So if I press play, we should start seeing some data coming in. If I can find the playlist to start button, there we go. So it's got a carrier, it's detected a carrier. So we should see the data, there we are, and this is the data coming in off of the cassette interface, which is a pile of junk. This did work the last time I tried this. Actually turning the cassette over so you actually have some data that's from this computer helps probably to be able to reload it. So I've rewound the tape to the other side of the cassette now, and we press play. Our start as is on this one. Press play. We should see the system. It's a very short program recorded on it. It's the one that sets up the really long load program, test program. So it should just prove that the cassette will load from tape. There you go. So it's typing in lines. Of course, quite short lines, no throttling on at the moment, so that should be fine. Okay. And indeed we should have the program which will run to create the giant test program. There you go, so loaded successfully from cassette. Now if I won't generate all the data and save it because it takes quite some time, but if we I think after it now is the test data, so if we do a load, okay, it's a second copy of the program, which is fine, doesn't matter. We'll just let it run into the test data. Right, okay. So as you can see, it's loading in the data correctly. because this data was actually saved, I believe, with throttling on. So as you can see, that is successfully reloading because when it was saved, the throttle was on. So the key here is that you turn the throttling on when you do the save, so it records the adequate gaps on the system. Works perfectly to reload. I think what we find is the data the other side was actually the safe data that was saved without the throttling on, which allows you to test that it won't reload properly. Hopefully you've enjoyed that little brief journey through some of the Karen Orton machines. There are several others which will probably deserve their own video actually, since they're based on different things. I thoroughly suggest you explore Karen's site. We'll put the links down below, down under there, with some information on the video that provides a link to the main web page with the PIC14, the original one. That's pretty easy to make even on a bit of breadboard, and will allow you to explore the MK14. It is also on there is the actual nibble board, the PICL as it's called, and that's a good way to explore. It's got a proper serial output on it. I know we haven't seen it running, but it's very similar to these. It's easy enough to build and will allow you to experiment with the nibble programming language, and it's probably perfectly feasible to take the information that Karen's done on page 2 and add that to this project if you wish to do it. There's I know Phil has built one of them. We'll provide a link to his YouTube video showing the nibble project running. It really is quite a simple one to build if you want to play with this the SCMP and the language with fairly easy to get modern components. Karen showed remarkable fortitude after the terminal diagnosis. She promising to try and, when she got home, to try and complete the PIC implementation of the Science at Cambridge MK14 VDU we've been talking about on the forum. That was originally designed by Nick Toop, he of Acorn and Enterprise 64 fame eventually. She was able to return home, and despite being severely limited to a small table on a hospital bed, she managed to get a design working pretty rapidly, demonstrated using an EEPROM to show data. So it's a link to a video as well that shows that running some of the programs for the MK14, because two of us on the forum, Sibs and myself, built full versions of the Orton View as it became nicknamed by Slothy, and this is the sort of final running one. It's just got one little hack on it that allows me to vary one of the resistors that allows the error we were trying to find to show up, and it's got the fixed capacitors now mounted on the top rather than underneath, which should delay the coming up of the address lines, which was actually the underlying bug that we found. So that was a subject of a bit of a flurry of activity, because Karen's last post, number 787, on the 30th of October, was while we were trying to find that last bug, and we did fix it with those capacitors on the 6th of November, and she sadly passed away a few days later. But that thread's had over 18,000 views and is the 5th highest ranking thread in the Vintage Computers section of the Vintage Radio Forum. So I'm sure you'll agree these machines, and we've seen inside some of them, exhibit craftsmanship that had to be seen to be believed. And hopefully you'll spend some time looking through the links to the amazing quality documentation that accompanies these machines. Maybe build one or more to explore this unusual and forgotten MPU. As I said, I will do a future video covering some of the other projects like the Z80, the PIC X80, ZX79, Karen back. They're all clever in their own way as well for various reasons. And maybe we'll get the little SCMP microcomputer with some batteries in it. Okay, so the executive toy has got some batteries in it now, so if we press the run button, then the halt comes on, which means the process is in a halt state. So we can, no matter how many times we hit run, it fetches, it just gets nothing out of that address because there's no data in address 0. So if we, well, it's just a halt instructions because it's all zeros. So if we increment, which actually increments the process to address 1, there's an item in there, so we can run it, and that fetches it and does it, increments to address 2, and then runs to the halt instruction again, which is at address 3. So if I increment past address 3, so we are now at address 4, there's actually a program here, which when I press run, will start to count up in binary. It's on the address bus, moving back and forth, carrying out the instructions. Isn't that cute? 3 little 1.5 volt batteries inside. Executive toy. The deposit button can be used to write a value into memory from those switches, so you can overwrite the pre-loaded program. And hopefully we'll cover the printer as well in a future video. So we'll just say one thing.